So we're joined by Michelle from Fairfax Cryobank, and Michelle is Lab Director and CCO. Fairfax Cryobank is one of the leading US sperm banks, and they provide one of the largest selections of donors and donor information products and storage solutions for clients globally. Michelle is going to be hosting a webinar for us with a talk on donor recruiting, screening, donor infectious diseases and genetic disease screening. And she'll also be providing a description of donor sperm preparation types and how they can be used. So I think this is going to provide a really useful insight to anyone that might be considering using donor sperm. So I'll now hand over to Michelle, who will introduce herself and tell you a bit more about Fairfax Cryobank and give you the lowdown and all you need to know on donor sperm. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to present today. Excuse me, and I'm very happy to be involved with the Fertility Circle app. I think it's a fantastic resource for everyone, and I love the interface. It's so pretty. So today I'm going to talk about the need to know on donor sperm. I'm going to give you an overview of everything. As Karen said, I'm the Lab Director and Director of Operations for Fairfax Cryobank. I work out of our Philadelphia office. But I oversee all of our production sites. And what I mean by that is the locations of the labs where we recruit, screen, test, process, and freeze the donor sperm. We do also provide client banking services. That's not going to be part of this talk. Maybe that could be another talk that we do at some other time. So just to get started, I do want to note, as Karen said, we are recording this webinar and it will be shared with registered participants. So I always like to get started by presenting what the goals of the webinar are, excuse me, just so that we have a little bit of accountability and try to stay on track. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the screening process so that you understand how we get our donors and what we do to ensure that they are the highest quality, best tested donors that we can offer. I'm going to go over that testing information for the infectious disease testing, as well as the genetic disease screening. I'm going to talk about the actual preparation types of the sperm, what you should purchase for what procedure that you're going to have. And then we'll do a nice Q&A section at the end where I can answer some of your questions. And if we have a small enough group, we can make it very much like a discussion or conversation. So just to get started, we are recruiting donors and in 6 locations in the United States. So we're looking for men that are healthy, they're 18 to 39, and we're looking for them through online ads, print ads, through radio advertisements. And basically, we're casting a wide net and trying to get anybody who's interested to go to our donor website, apply, and then we start the screening process. Just to let you know, the active donors in our program, about 65% of them who are actively accepted in participating in weekly donations are between the ages of 21 and 29. 20% of them are married and have their own children. We have the 6 locations that I mentioned, and we're in very diverse cities. I mentioned I'm in Philadelphia. We have 2 labs in Texas, which are Austin and Houston. We're in Fairfax, Virginia, which is close to the DC metropolitan area. And then we're in Roseville, Minnesota, and then Pasadena, California. So as you can imagine, we get a hugely diverse swath of guys that are applying to the program. Let's see. So as I mentioned, the interested applicants will go to the website and they'll complete an initial questionnaire. And that's asking some eligibility questions that might rule them out. So there's some logic built into that first step. And then if they get through that, about 50% of them do, they would complete a full medical application. This application is about their health history and the health history of their first and second degree relatives. If the applicant has a child of his own, it also reports their medical history. This is self-reported. The medical application is then reviewed by our staff against some guidelines that we have internally. And this is just looking at suitability. At this point, we're looking for medical suitability. Our medical director has worked with genetic counselors to develop a guideline so that we're looking for things that, we're basically at this step trying to rule out applicants who might have predispositions to certain conditions that would be heritable. Once the medical application is reviewed, we then start bringing applicants in to screen their actual semen samples. We look at several semen samples over the course of a couple weeks. because as you can imagine, we need donors that have a better than average semen quality, because they have to be healthy and have enough sperm, motile, happy swimming sperm, so that they will be able to survive the freeze thaw process. As you can imagine, cryopreservation is really hard on sperm cells. It's hard on any cell. So we're looking for really good semen samples. Once we have done that and we have ruled out the donors whose samples wouldn't be suitable for the program, doesn't mean they have anything wrong and they couldn't conceive on their own. It just means that they wouldn't necessarily work out for the program. We then move on to a physical exam, infectious disease screening, testing, and genetic screening. So the donor application, as I mentioned, collects 3 to 4 generations of medical history. It asks certain lifestyle questions, such as alcohol consumption, diet, smoking, things like that, because all of those lifestyle questions inform semen quality. Anything that affects a person's physiology or their health is going to have an effect on their semen quality. So we want to have that information up front. You know, if somebody is a heavy drinker, a heavy smoker, likelihood is that their samples are not going to be very good. And if we see that in the first screening sample, we know it's not necessarily worth it to continue screening them. Excuse me. So then when we do that, the semen sample screening, this is just a screenshot through the microscope. I don't know if you can see, I'll put the video on. Is that swimming for you guys? Okay, so you can see they're moving along, swimming really nicely. So this would be how we would account for the motility of the cell, of the sample. So we're looking, as I said, to ensure the quality, test for the survivability of that freeze thaw process, and we're looking for consistency in the sample. As you can imagine, in order to help these cells survive that freeze thaw process, we have to do a little bit of a manipulation to the sample. So we're doing this evaluation on count, motility. We're looking for morphology, which is the shape of the cell. We're looking at debris. Natural debris occurs in all semen samples. There can be epithelial or skin cells. There can be, immature sperm cells, things like that. We do a full evaluation of every sample, and every sample we freeze a test file to look at that post-thaw evaluation. Now, before we freeze, what we do is we're either washing the sample, and I'll go into more detail with this with the preparation types, or we're just adding a freeze media. And the freeze media that we add to the sample includes a cryoprotectant. In our case, we're adding the cryoprotectant glycerol. And what happens there is the glycerol replaces the water in the cell, because as you know, when water freezes, ice crystals form. And as you can imagine, ice crystals would damage a cell membrane, in effect, killing the cell. So if the glycerol can replace some of that water, the freezing process is a little bit more gentle. You don't get that ice crystal formation that's going to break up the membranes. Probably not interesting to everybody, but I like it. Okay. So then what happens after, let me stop the video, sorry. The next thing we do is we take the whole package of the medical application, the semen sample data. We take photos internally of the applicants that our medical director, who is based at our Virginia location, he looks at those photos of hands and face and profile to ensure there's no dysmorphia, that there are no indicators of a heritable disorder. We do a criminal background check on the applicants. We do the personality assessment inventory, which is a psychological evaluation to identify psychopathologies. And all of that information is put together in a package by my staff, and it's sent to myself as the lab director, the medical director, our labs manager, a genetic counselor, and our director of client services. And we review the applicant and we say, is this a good candidate for our program? Is this somebody who not only is going to have high quality donor sperm, but somebody who meets the needs of the recipients that are purchasing our sperm? If the applicant at this point receives approval, the next step is to schedule a physical examination, which is a comprehensive physical examination that's looking at full body health. It's also looking for indicators of disease and includes specific FDA required screening. I want to go back a moment One of the things I didn't mention that I should have mentioned is that that medical application is reviewed multiple times with the applicant. They sit down with our staff and they have to verbally verify all of the information. During that interview, 75% of the time, we actually gain more information because of the discussion and the questions so that we can get more complete information. Just wanted to mention that. Okay. So the day of the physical exam, we also do an infectious disease testing panel where we draw the blood and we send it off to a contracted FDA certified lab. We complete all of the required testing. The FDA in the States is what regulates sperm banking. So we're doing all of the required diseases. And then we actually go above and beyond. We have a molecular infectious disease testing lab as part of our parent company, Genetics and IVF. So we have the capacity to do some additional testing that we feel adds real value. At this point, we're the only sperm bank that's doing PCR or DNA testing on the semen to identify herpes simplex virus 1 and 2, and more importantly, to identify the human papillomavirus strains 16 and 18. Now, those two strains of HPV are known causative agents in cervical cancer. If a donor comes back as reactive on the DNA test for HPV, he is excluded from our program. Okay, so all of that infectious disease testing happens. We also do extensive genetic disease screening. All of our donors have what's called a karyotype or a chromosome analysis. If you are really interested in the genetics, excuse me, the genetic screening that we do, we actually did a webinar that's available on our website that you're able to review. Our genetic counselor, Suzanne Seitz, presented a detailed explanation of the expanded carrier screening that we do, which is a panel of over 280 diseases that are recessive, meaning that both the donor and the recipient would need to have the same mutation to have an affected child. So that screening information is extensive, and you can find all of that information online. So we do all of the genetic screening. There are certain conditions that would rule an applicant out, and then there are others that if they're a carrier themselves, they are still part of the program, but there's a consent process that's required for the recipient to purchase that donor. And the one thing I'll say about genetic screening is it's constantly evolving. This technology did not exist when sperm banking started, you know, in the 70s. This was not a possibility. And as the screening capacity of these on these testing panels expands, we're constantly evaluating value added. The lab that we use is called Semaphore. I believe at this point, at least two other cryobanks in the United States are using the same testing lab, and we're doing the same expanded carrier screening. They're now talking about expanding their panel to include more diseases. So this is something that's going to be constantly evolving, but that information is all available for each donor on our website. Okay. So once we have all of those results, so we're still in the screening process. So once we have the physical exam results, the infectious disease testing results, and the genetic disease screening results, it comes back to that donor review committee. We look at the whole package, and that's when an applicant would get approval. So this whole process can take anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks. And at this point, no samples have been stored. We're not going to store anything to sell to you until we have all of these results and we know that the donor is suitable. Once we have all the results, we start banking, and he starts coming in and producing samples weekly for us. Only 1 in 200 initial applicants actually makes it through that screening process to become a donor. So it's not easy. As you can imagine, providing all of that information, you know, digging in your family medical history, providing transcripts to verify, you know, your education, all of that information is required. So it takes a real commitment from the applicants. And with all of those screening criteria, as I said, only 1 in 200 initial applicants makes it. Okay, so there's a lot of information on our catalog to help you to choose the right donor for you. We do verify education by either getting a copy of their transcript from the university or a diploma, a copy of the diploma. They complete a really extensive personal profile. There's so much information in this profile. Everything from when their mother and father's hair went gray to, their astrological sign to their educational excellence in whatever subjects were good for them. We provide childhood photos on the donors. About 30, I think it was 40% of our donors that are currently available on the website now have either an adult or lifetime series. The lifetime series is just what it sounds like. It's a series of photos put together into a package of the donor from childhood baby photo all the way through his current age. And then the donor provides essays. We have a personality type test. We have audio interviews, clips of the audio interviews. There are all types of products to help you to get to know the donors, to find that perfect donor for you. As the donors are participating in the program and leaving samples weekly, we are continually doing eligibility and suitability screening. Every time they come in, they complete a screening questionnaire to ensure that there hasn't been any change that would deem them ineligible to participate. We're doing infectious disease testing every 90 days, and we're constantly collecting updated family and donor information. One of the things I'll mention is that the FDA does require that every sample that's produced remains in quarantine for a minimum of 6 months, and it has a follow-up blood draw with all acceptable results in order to release the samples from quarantine. So the donors that are producing today, that inventory will not be released and available to the public for a minimum of 6 months. Something I want to talk about here is the fact that we recognized ages ago that the medical application, that medical profile, which is free to download on all of our donors, is a snapshot in time. It is completed when the donor applies. So he's young, his parents are probably young, his grandparents are probably young, and everybody's probably healthy. But we recognize that's him today. But what's going to happen 5 years from now? What's going to happen 10 years from now? We're all going to have health issues at some point in our life. Our parents are going to pass away. Our grandparents are going to pass away. So years ago, we created a secure online system for our donors to log in at least annually, but as needed, to update their information. And they can update their information and their family's information. So what you will see, and I believe I have the link here, I can pull this up for you as an example. What you'll see is on the summary profile, look at this little cutie. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, and this is a free product online, you'll see here updates to the donor's profile. So in 2015, he let us know there were no changes.
There. I'm trying to send, I'm trying to arrange a courier for an item on account. It's going.
There we go. In 2016, there was no update, same here. And then this year, he updated that his occupation changed. There haven't been any updates to his medical profile, but what you'll often see here is, down here for his family, maternal grandfather passed away at 84 from a heart attack. So this is useful and critical information for your offspring, for your children, because it's their health history. It's part of their health record. So we really work hard annually to reach out to our donors. We have a whole bunch of guys that just log in random times during the year to update everything from I finished my degree, I got married, I had a baby, I'm on high blood pressure medicine, things like that are always updated on the summary profile, and that's constantly being processed. We really feel that this is an important part of what we have to offer for our donors. Now, keep in mind, if you're looking at a donor who's new, he's not going to have updates because he's active in the program, and anything that we're getting information for will be in his profile. Okay. Okay. Specimen types. This is where I get a lot of questions. So I just want to give you a little bit of information, and if there's follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them. I mentioned to you that once the donor's in the program, he's producing samples weekly. So as he comes in, every sample gets a fresh semen evaluation. We look at the health and the health of the sample. We're doing that count, that motility, all of those parameters I mentioned, and we're deciding how we're going to process that. There are 3 types of vials that you can purchase from Fairfax Cryobank and from most sperm banks. We provide intracervical insemination preparation, that's ICI. And what that is it's a standard sample. The seminal fluid is not washed out. What happens is we do the evaluation and we're adding a freeze media to freeze and help that sample survive that freeze thaw. We do that little test file, and every sample has a post-thaw evaluation done on it. Those samples can be used for an intracervical or at-home insemination. They can be washed by your clinic to use for an intrauterine insemination. The reason that you would have to have an ICI sample washed is because you can't put seminal fluid in the uterus. There are hormones and proteins in seminal fluid that would cause severe cramping if they passed through the cervix into the uterus. So we also sell at prep and sell the more popular product, which is the intrauterine insemination, or IUI prep, and that is pre-washed. So the sample evaluation happens. We use a enhanced wash media to remove the seminal fluid and pellet those sperm, and then the sperm are resuspended in the media and frozen with the cryoprotectant. And those can be used directly by your medical provider or midwife, whoever's doing your intrauterine insemination. That sample can be used directly. We also offer what we call ART samples. So these can be either ICI or IUI. And the assistive reproductive technology samples are vials that have slightly fewer total motile sperm numbers. And the reason we did this is we wanted to offer a cost-effective option for people who, for example, are going to do IVF or ICSI. IVF is in vitro fertilization, and ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where they take one egg and a sperm and they fertilize. So clearly, if you're doing IVF or ICI, you don't need as many sperm. So to have to purchase an expensive vial when you really only need a couple sperm, we wanted to offer that as an option. Now you can use them for regular inseminations. You would just use 2 of the ART prep. And on our website, hopefully I have the link correct. I think I do. We have a little infographic that's helpful for you. The key is here that explains all of the different acronyms. And then if, for example, you know that you're going to have an in-office insemination, this tells you what you would purchase. Obviously, we want you to go with your medical provider's recommendation. If they recommend something different, that's fine. This is just a guideline for you so that you have in mind what you need for the procedure type that you may be having. If you're having an in-home insem, here are your options. If you're doing IVF or ICSI. So this little infographic is really helpful. Let me go back here. So those are our specimen types that we offer. So then really it's just about selecting your donor and placing your order. And the donor search is really easy to use. And there's a great tool at the top of it that I want to just demonstrate. You can click here to choose the country that you are going to need the sperm for use. Because obviously we're based in the States. I know most of the users at this point on the app are in the UK. But we have the option here for Canada, UK, Germany, or Brazil. And what that will do, I'm just going to click on the UK, is now you're only going to see donors that are available for you in the UK, so that you don't search on the US site, find a donor that's not eligible for UK distribution and get your hopes, don't get your hopes up. So always make sure that you're on the right country. And there's a little flag icon up here just so that you can make sure you're in the right place. And obviously there are so many parameters that you can use to whittle down the list of donors. I always recommend starting with a list of characteristics that you value, either in yourself, your partner, or in people in general, whether that's physical characteristics, education, religion, anything like that. And you can use all of our different search options here to find the donors that you're interested in. We have advanced searches where you can get into deeper details. And I do just want to mention, you have the option to search specifically for donors who have been tested and are negative for certain genetic carrier status. So you can either search by a specific genetic disease, and they're all listed here. As I said, I'm going to defer to that genetics webinar that we did for lots of detail on this, but it's a great tool if that's something that you're using to search by. And then you just click the search button, and what you're going to see is right now in the UK, we've got 153 donors available. And you can go through and you can choose whichever donor you're interested in. You'll see here all of the free products that are available for download. And then there are different products that you can purchase. I would actually recommend the unlimited access package that you purchase for a 3-month period, and it gives you access to all of the information on all of the donors. And the good thing about my recommending that is that we are offering you full unlimited access through the end of the month for attending this webinar. So I hope that this was helpful for you all, and I'm very happy to answer any and all of your questions.
Thank you, Michelle. There's so much information there. It's really interesting. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to unmute your microphone and your camera if you wish and ask your question. Or if you want to pop it in the chat box, I can ask the question for you, whichever you prefer. Just whilst we wait for people to pop any questions through, I have some questions after that.
Sure, happy.
I was thinking about the effect of coronavirus on sperm donation, and has that affected the number of donors that have come forward?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's something that we're getting asked a lot. So, coronavirus, as I hope everybody is aware at this point, is a respiratory virus. It is new, so there's very little data out there and published. But the bit of data that we do have so far is not showing that the SARS-CoV-2 virus actually persists in semen. So the FDA and American Society of Reproductive Medicine have some guidelines on screening questions. So we are doing that screening on donors and donor applicants to ask if they have known or possible exposure, if they themselves have had any symptoms. We, as I mentioned, have the MIDL lab, the Molecular Infectious Disease Testing Lab, and we're actually running diagnostic PCR testing for COVID, which is great because it keeps our staff safe, it keeps the donor safe. So we're doing that testing on all of the donors as they come in as well. And so we did have a bit of a slowdown when there were stay-at-home orders and government requirements to shelter in place, things like that. But here in the States, as many of you know, state to state, our regulations vary. So the sort of wave of that affected my labs at different times. We also didn't really have cases being reported until about February, March. So there was an initial slowdown, but we're doing well and things are back up. We really believe in the screening and testing that we're doing, and we're doing everything we can to keep everybody safe. We've got the masks, I've got my little mask here, we're all masked up, we're all hand sanitizing, we've got barriers up, everybody's staying safe, and we've moved to no contact practices. So instead of handing the specimen cup and sheets to the donors, we're placing them in the donor rooms for them. We're still doing all of the identity verifications and everything, but generally we're actually seeing people more engaged through the pandemic.
And are you still able to do the in-person examinations of the donors?
Yeah, so we're still doing the meetings. We've got the barriers up in the offices. The donor physicals are still happening with our contracted physicians. We're still doing the blood draws. We have some additional PPEs in place of a face shield, and everybody's fully covered during the blood draws. So we are still doing all of our regular practices. We've just adjusted them to be as safe as possible and avoid any contact. And I can tell you, we've had a very small number of donors report to us that they have been COVID positive, and that's always happened before they've even come to our site. They had an exposure at an event or something, and either were symptomatic or got tested and didn't come in, and we are following a deferral protocol for anybody who has even a suspected exposure at this point.
And if someone has tested positive at some point, do you recommend that they delay providing any samples for a certain amount of time? Or
yeah, the recommendation is 28 days after the symptoms. So we're doing 28 days after symptoms have disappeared, and in order for them to come back, they have to have 2 negative tests within a certain period. So we're being a little bit more careful than we need to be, but we always try to err on the side of caution because we want to provide the best quality, safest samples to people.
Definitely. It's always best to be cautious, especially when we don't know possibly the long-term effects or
Yes.
how it's going to affect sperm. But it sounds like you have quite a long process to recruit the donors anyway. So,
Yeah.
by the time they're actually producing samples that are going to be used, it's quite a way off when they initially start.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and also what was I going to say? I've lost it. Oh yeah, so when you have donors, is there a limit to how many families can have children with that donor sperm?
Yes. So in the United States, we have implemented a limit based on, population, but also based on the needs and the feedback that we're getting from donor conceived individuals and families that are using donor sperm. We've implemented a limit of 25 family limit in the United States. So when we have 25 births reported to us, we won't distribute that donor to new users. That doesn't mean that if you've already reported a family to us, couldn't have siblings. You can. We want to allow for that so that you have full genetic siblings. We then internationally follow the regulations of the locale that we're talking about. So in the UK, the HFEA requires a limit of 10. So we work with our distributors in the UK to track the reported births, and we stop distribution at 10 families. There are some other countries where the limits are smaller, 5 for some of the states. In Australia, for example. And then if other countries don't have a specified limit outside of the United States, we limit to 15 in a specific country. So it varies donor to donor, but we are following the requirements of each of the international locations in which we distribute.
So if a donor, for example, was only in the UK permitted to a family up to 10 different families, and would you cap it at 10 so they wouldn't have because it's 25 in the US and 10 in the UK, you wouldn't allow more? Once you reach 10 maximum for that donor, that would be it? Or are they still
it would be combined. So the regulation for
Yeah.
the UK is 10 specifically in the UK, and then we would also limit in the United States, and that would be their cap.
Okay. Yeah. There's so much information about the donors, isn't there? I think it's
There is.
wonderful that you update the information as well. I
Yes.
think it's really important for families to know, the health of their child as they grow up and any potential things that could affect that. So it's amazing that you do.
Yeah.
So
That's
with
something I felt very strongly about, was getting that updated information. And it's, transparency is so important. 100% of the guys they're not all participating. We have good participation, and the donors, since we implemented the process, are more active in it. The donors from 25 years ago, before this process existed, it's very difficult to get them to comply, because in some cases, email wasn't even a thing back then. So we don't even have, that ability to email them. So we have reached out. We tried to do a back reach out to all of those older donors. And we do have some of them participating. And over time, as you can imagine, donors are being contacted and identified through ancestry websites. This is much more popular in the United States because we're all so like mixes of so many different things over here that people are very interested in their ancestry. So as we're getting contacted by some of those older donors, we're not only collecting that information, but we're also helping them with some resources just so that they can navigate the contact and everything as well.
That's really cool. I think more people are taking an interest in their DNA and their history. Even here, I know a lot of people are doing it, and it's very important when it comes to donor conception. How you go about explaining to your child how you've conceived them and things like that, because there are more ways now for people to be able to find out.
Yeah. And we're very open with the applicants as they're coming in. And we have said to them, like, there is no such thing as anonymity in this world.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore through photo recognition, these DNA websites. The donor themselves doesn't even have to participate. It can be a cousin, a sibling, a parent.
Yeah.
And if somebody else is participating and agrees to contact, you will be identified. We are sticking strong to our processes, though. If you used an ID donor and the child wants that contact, we won't release it until the child is 18.
Yeah.
That's the policy. That's how, that's how we have agreed to do this, both with the recipients and with the donors. And we have a really good process in place. We're actually beefing up our website to make that a little bit easier for the offspring so that they can submit their request online. And we actually have a great family forum where donor conceived individuals can connect with siblings right on our website. it's not that we're trying to control it at all. We're just trying to provide a forum for them to do that. And the other thing I'll mention that didn't come up is if there is an adverse report, if something does come to us, if there's medical information that's relevant, we do review that in depth. And if it's something that increases risk for offspring, we will do what we call a notification process. But that really relies, just like the birth reporting, we really rely on people to give us that information and communicate that information. So there are a lot of third-party websites out there where people are making connections, and that's great. However you want to connect is fantastic. But if there's something that's medically relevant, we really, really need recipients to communicate that directly to us so that we can act responsibly and communicate that to other recipients.
Yeah, it sounds like throughout your long recruiting process, they are made aware of all these things. And if they commit to becoming a donor, you know, that's part of it, that they may have to provide that information. So hopefully they do. We've had a question come in. How do you go about ensuring a full genetic sibling with a donor for future planning?
So
do you need to purchase multiple samples to ensure availability, or how long are they typically available for?
Yeah, we always recommend that if you have the means to purchase multiple vials, you do it in the moment when you're ready to go, because there is no guarantee that that inventory will be available long term. And if you store with us, like you can purchase today, let's say you purchase 6 vials, you can store with us and we'll ship what you need for your insemination. And as long as the samples don't leave either our hands or our distributor's hands, you can always return what you don't use for a partial refund. That information's on our website. But it's really the only way to guarantee that you're going to have samples available. It's really hard to predict how long inventory will be available because not all of the donors produce the same amount. Family limits differ in different locations. So there's really, that's the only way to guarantee it. Which is why we run specials sometimes for storage. Like if you purchase a certain number of vials, we'll give you a certain amount of storage free. Look out for those things and check those things out on our fee sheet on our websites, because that may be helpful. This is not an inexpensive process. This is a long, expensive, emotional process. And so we want to do whatever we can to help you. I do know that there have been instances where through the forums, people have said, I use donor ABC, you use donor ABC, I'm done building my family. Do you need some of the sperm? And you can do a transfer of ownership. We can facilitate that for you as long as it's still in our hands.
Would you ever contact the donor if someone came to you and said, we had used this donor previously, would they be interested in redonating?
Yeah, we get requests. That's what we call a reactivation. And as long as the donor still meets all of the eligibility requirements, we'll ask him to what we call reactivate, where he'll produce specifically for one recipient. It is not inexpensive because the donor is not in the program. So basically you're going to pay for the testing, the screening, all of it, instead of just buying the one vial that has been part of a bigger process. So it's a little bit more expensive, but if having a genetic sibling is important to you, that is an option. I will say it's not always possible, especially if your donor has aged out and he's no longer eligible, or if there's been a change that has led to him no longer being eligible, either in testing status or something like that. And sometimes they're just not available, depending on what you're willing to do. We have had instances where the guy no longer lives near one of our locations, but he'll fly to us, but that makes it more expensive for you. We just had an instance where the donor is now living in Hong Kong, so that's not, we can't.
Expensive.
Yeah, we can't do that. Yeah.
It's quite difficult at the time when you are making your choice of a donor. You spend a long time selecting your donor, and there's a lot going on emotionally. It's quite a challenging process. And some people, they don't think, how many am I going to need? You might not think about the future in advance and how much you might need. And my advice would be order more than you think you might need, because you just don't know what's going to happen with each one of those. And it's probably better to have, because you don't want to have to keep going through the process of doing another donor search and going through it all again. So if you can afford to have a few extra, it's worthwhile.
Yeah,
definitely. I don't think any other questions have come through. I just had one other question about when you're recruiting the donors, if they produce some sperm samples, perhaps they're not up to the quality that you need. Do you offer them advice on how to improve their sperm quality?
We do. So if a guy comes in at something, you know, like his motility is a little low or it's borderline, or maybe his count's a little low and he came in with only 48 hours of abstinence, we can make some recommendations for them. Now, keep in mind, if we did an evaluation and somebody's semen sample was well below what the World Health Organization would qualify as a healthy male sample, we would give them a copy of those results and refer them immediately to a urologist and say, like, you really need to talk to a medical provider. There's something going on. But if it's something that we can tweak through a lifestyle change, either more abstinence hours, stay well hydrated, you would be surprised. Boys do not drink water.
Yeah.
They just don't. It's ridiculous. So we're constantly telling them they have to stay well hydrated. Otherwise the sample's really concentrated and it can, you know, the motility can suffer, or, you know, eat healthier, sleep better, stress. Like I said in the beginning, anything that affects somebody's physiology or their overall health is going to have an effect on sperm quality, whether that's positive or negative. You know, there have been instances where a guy's sample was not great, and we would say, like, come back in 6 months. Here are some things you can do. You know, take some vitamin supplements, make sure you're getting folic acid, eat greens, drink water, be healthy. Sometimes they're interested enough that they'll make those changes and come back. And even with our active donors, you'd be surprised. Like, there are some guys that we know, like, during exams, you don't come in for a couple weeks. Like, you're just going to look terrible because your stress is too high. Or we have a physician who during certain periods, you know, when he was in his residency, we put him on a break during his residency because the stress is so much for medical providers, especially now. You know, and he took a break and came back 4 months later and his sample was fine and donated. So we're constantly working with our guys to optimize their samples.
That's so good, because there's so much they can do to improve things naturally and just through lifestyle. So it's great that you can help them with that. So if there's not any more questions, I'll just let you know again, you can see the offer on the screen there that Michelle and Fairfax Cryobank have provided. This is an amazing offer. It will entitle you to a free, full, unlimited access package. And this unlocks all the donor profiles, and you can review the sperm donors and make the best choice for you. It's valid from now until the end of November, so do go check that out. We will email anyone the code afterwards. So if anyone that hasn't already wants to send me their email address privately, I can add you to the mailing list and we'll get that sent out to you. And then to activate, you can go to Fairfax Cryobank website. We'll put all the details in the email, and you can also find Michelle's contact details on the app in our expert profile section.
Yeah, so you can ask me questions there too.
Yes, and if there are any questions following this, please do get in touch with either us or Michelle, and we can get those answered for you. So thank you so much, Michelle. That was a really informative presentation.
Great.
And like we say, if anyone has any questions, do get in touch, and we'll put you in touch with Michelle. I'm sure she'd love to help.
Absolutely.
Please do check out the app and look for further events that are coming up, because we've got lots planned, and we hope to do more of these. So we'll see you there. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.